In Korea, you boarded an actual completed version of the submarine Hanwha Ocean was offering to Canada. In Germany, they gave you a small model of what they're offering. What did TKMS Germany promise in terms of delivery schedule for all 12 submarines? And is there not a considerable risk of Canada having almost no submarine capability until the late 2030s and not having a full fleet of 12 or more for more than 25 years, given there is no German submarine built or tested? TKMS has limited shipyard capacity, and these development programs always go later over budget.
Thank you. First off, thank you for your question. To your question and to the previous question, there does become a question of relativities, how much resources you put in one and the other, and how much they're integrated, and that's part of the technological development. What's clear is we have one submarine that's operational in Canada. We have 3 coasts. We do not have enough submarine capacity.
Host takes over. That's not spin. That's the Prime Minister of Canada admitting on the record just how thin the country's actual submarine capability is right now, in the same press conference where he announced the largest defense purchase in Canadian history. Today we're going inside that press conference, past the headline announcement, into the tough questions Carney actually had to answer. This wasn't just a policy announcement dropped in a press release. It happened in Halifax, introduced by Doug Guzman, head of Canada's newly created Defence Investment Agency, with Carney flanked by his industry and defence ministers and Nova Scotia's premier. Carney opened by pointing back to a moment 3 months earlier in that same city when Canada hit NATO's 2% defence spending target for the first time since the Berlin Wall fell. His message this time was that 2% was never the ceiling, it was the floor, and what came next was the real proof of that. Carney leaned hard on history to make his case, arguing that the assumptions that shaped Canadian defense policy for 3 decades no longer hold. His phrase for it was blunt: history is back with a vengeance. Drones, autonomous systems, hypersonic weapons, an increasingly assertive Russia, an Arctic that's thawing open to new shipping routes and new competition. In his telling, all of it adds up to a threat environment Canada hasn't faced since the Cold War ended. The headline decision: Canada has picked TKMS, a German-led consortium, as the preferred supplier for up to 12 new patrol submarines, with Hanwha Ocean of South Korea held in reserve if those negotiations fall through. The submarines themselves are genuinely advanced. Carney described a fuel cell propulsion system that lets them stay submerged for more than 40 days at a stretch in near-total silence, purpose-built for operating under Arctic ice, and fully wired to work alongside NATO systems. TKMS already supplies submarines to roughly a third of the NATO alliance, and as part of the deal, Germany and Norway have agreed to reallocate some of their own production slots so Canada can get its first 4 submarines by 2034, 5 years earlier than the original procurement timeline called for. But it was the Q&A after the announcement that revealed the real stakes. A reporter from the Globe and Mail pushed Carney on the timeline directly. Germany hasn't built or tested this exact submarine model yet. TKMS has limited shipyard capacity, and defense programs like this have a long history of running late and over budget. Her question, in plain terms, could Canada end up with almost no functioning submarine fleet through the late 2030s and not a full complement of boats for 25 years or more? Carney didn't dodge the framing. He confirmed Canada currently has exactly 1 operational submarine and 3 trained crews, nowhere close to what the Navy actually needs. His answer leaned on the reallocated delivery slots and on TKMS's track record supplying submarines across NATO as reasons for confidence, but he stopped short of promising the timeline couldn't slip. Reporters also pushed repeatedly for an actual price tag, and Carney repeatedly declined to give one, arguing that revealing numbers now would undermine Canada's negotiating position with TKMS. What he did confirm: this is the single largest procurement in Canadian history, the cost is already accounted for in the federal budget, and as a condition of the deal, 100% of the contract's value has to be matched with investment inside Canada. That's expected to translate into tens of billions of dollars flowing into shipyards, engineering firms, and skilled trades across the country, though the precise figure won't be public until the contract negotiations, expected to take somewhere between 6 and 18 months, are finished. Carney was unusually specific about where that money is supposed to land. Engineers in Vancouver and Halifax building long-term sustainment capability. Simulator technology out of Montreal training the sailors who'll crew these boats. Clean energy companies in Calgary contributing to how the fleet gets powered. Aerospace technicians in Manitoba working on the torpedoes it will carry. It's a deliberate strategy to spread the industrial benefit across regions rather than concentrating it in one province, and it doubles as a political strategy, making the project harder for any future government to unwind since so many ridings end up with a stake in it. One of the sharper questions of the day came from a reporter asking whether a fleet that won't fully arrive for close to a decade risks being obsolete, given how fast drone and autonomous underwater vehicle technology is moving. Carney's answer was that this isn't an either-or choice. Canada is planning to integrate crewed submarines with autonomous drones and space-based systems together, not replace one with the other. It's a reasonable answer, but it also sidesteps the harder version of the question, whether spending tens of billions on crewed submarines is the smartest use of defense dollars in an era when uncrewed systems are getting cheaper and more capable every year. There's also a workforce problem hiding inside this announcement. 12 submarines need a lot more trained submariners than Canada currently has. Carney pointed to the Royal Canadian Navy hitting its recruitment targets for the first time in years as a positive sign and framed the submarine program as a genuine career pipeline. Engineering, skilled trades, and technical roles that will be in demand for decades as the fleet is built, maintained, and eventually replaced. By the end of the press conference, this had stopped being a story about submarines specifically. Carney confirmed Canada's total defense and resilience spending is on track to hit 4% of GDP by the end of the decade, ahead of NATO's own 2035 deadline, with this submarine purchase as one piece of a much larger buildup that includes new patrol aircraft, Arctic radar, a fleet of new destroyers, and new icebreakers. He was flying to the NATO summit in Ankara that same night to make exactly that case to Canada's allies. So which is the real story here? A historic, accelerated investment that finally gives Canada a credible submarine fleet, or a government making a massive bet on a boat that hasn't been built yet, with a delivery timeline that depends on everything going right? Based on Carney's own answers, it's probably both at once. Do you think this submarine deal is a smart long-term bet, or too much risk for too little certainty? Subscribe to Unbiased Canada, hit like, and let us know in the comments.